So again, the principle on generality or general application of criminal laws states that as a general rule, criminal laws are binding upon all persons who live or sojourn in the Philippines, subject to the principles of public international law and to treaty stipulations. So, laws of preferential application, generally accepted principles of public international law, such as those among the diplomats, but not the consuls, and also treaty stipulations are exceptions to this generality principle. Very, very quickly, let me bring you back to the case of Lance Corporal Smith. This was a case of rape that happened in Olongapo City. So apparently, this military officer Smith committed the act against a Filipino citizen. But because of this treaty stipulation, the Visiting Forces Agreement, which states that trial should be made at the home country of the accused, then the case was not tried here in the Philippines, but it was tried in the US. So those are a few examples on how these particular cases or exceptions um, are practiced in actual application. Right. Now let's move on to another principle, which is territoriality. The principle of territoriality means that, as a rule, penal laws of the Philippines are enforceable only within its territory, but there are exceptions. One exemption is the Article 1 of the Philippine Constitution, um, which actually um, states that the Philippine national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction. It consists of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas. The waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimensions, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. So that is what constitutes the Philippine territory. Now take note that in relation to this, there are extraterritorial crimes. What are these extraterritorial crimes? These are commission and these the types of extraterritorial crimes are as follows. One is commission of an offense in a Philippine ship or airship na nangyari sa isang barko ng Pilipinas or airship. So even if it's outside the Philippine territory, it still and should be governed by the Philippine Revised Penal Code. Next is forging or counterfeiting any coin or currency note in the Philippines or obligations and securities issued by the government of the Philippines. Another is the introduction into the Philippines of these obligations and securities that are forged or counterfeited. Next is on public officers or employees who commit an offense in the exercise of their function. So if you're a public officer, such as the case of, Philippine National Police, they are treated as public officers. So kahit saan ka pa, no? If you're outside the Philippine territory, you should still be covered by the Philippine revised penal code. Another is, or it's actually considered as extraterritorial crime. Next is the commission of any crime against national security and the law of nations as defined in the Title 1 of Book 2 of this revised penal code. Just to elaborate further on the crimes that are committed on ships or airships, the following rules shall be considered. In crimes committed on Philippine ships or airships, the provisions of the revised penal code apply whether the said ship or airship is found in the Philippine waters or in high seas, as long as the ship or airship is registered under the Philippine laws. In crimes committed on private or merchant vessels found in the Philippines, the or Philippine territorial waters, the English rule shall be applied. In crimes committed on foreign warship, the nationality of the warship or airship determines the applicable penal laws to the crimes committed therein, as such airships or ships are considered to be an extension of the territory of the country to which they belong. What about the rules as to the jurisdiction over crimes committed aboard a foreign merchant vessel? So the Philippines adhere, there are actually two rules, and I mentioned one earlier. So as to jurisdiction over the crimes committed aboard a merchant vessel within the territorial waters of another country, we have two rules. One is the French rule, another is the English rule. Under the French rule, such crimes are not triable in courts of the coastal state unless their commission affects the peace and security of the territory or the safety of the state endangered. While in English rule, such crimes are triable in the courts of the coastal state unless they merely affect things within the vessel or they refer to internal management thereof. So, under the French rule, kapag may nangyari na or there's a commission of a crime in the ship or airship, if it affects the peace and security of the state kung saan nakadock yung ship, halimbawa, then the state, that particular state being endangered, will assume jurisdiction over the case. However, in English rule, it excludes those that are within the airship or ship, provided that they merely affect things within the vessel or they refer to internal management issues. Now, you can ask or you will ask, saan ba nag-adhere ang Philippines? So the Philippines adheres to the English rule. All right. Now, how about the case of public officers who commit crimes in the performance of their functions? There's a a question on whether a rape committed by a Philippine official in a foreign country can be prosecuted in the Philippine courts. Of course, that's answered in negative. No, of course. The crime of rape is not committed uh, in the performance of the public officer. Um, it, it, you know, kailangan ma-establish that the crime is committed in the performance of the public officer's official duties, and there is no official duty to commit or to do a rape, the act of rape, right? So this applies to, say, for instance, uh, entering into contracts. So while the public officer believes that he's performing his duty as a public officer, but um, he has committed a violation of the revised penal code, then he or she shall still be within the jurisdiction of the Philippine revised penal code. So it should apply to him or her if it's in the performance of the function or duty. In the case of crimes against national security and law of nations, conspiracy to commit codita is neither a crime against national security nor the law of nations, but a crime against public order. So, the revised penal code cannot also be applied. Yun po yung mga kailangan nating tandaan, no? What about this case on the Article 3 of the UN clause? Or because it's also important that we try to understand the baseline mark of the Philippine territory. Okay, so when I speak of baseline, it refers to the connection of the outermost points from the low water mark. We will try to understand this in relation to Article 3 of UN clause, which actually states that the territorial sea extends up to 12 nautical miles from the baseline, within which all penal laws shall apply. So within this area of 12 nautical miles from the baseline of the Philippine territory, the Philippine Revised Penal Code or the penal laws of the Philippines still applies. So if there are crimes committed within these 12 nautical miles from the baseline, then the RPC shall be applicable. Okay, so here is representation just to visually share to you what I meant of a 12 nautical mile limit. So in Article 33, contiguous zone, it refers to this part, which is the 12 nautical miles from the in reference to the Article 3 of UN clause, right? But if this is the baseline of internal waters of the Philippine territory, 12 nautical miles from that up to this point, they are still covered by the Philippine penal law. So RPC does apply. Okay, start here. All right. I have made mention of the following exceptions to territoriality. Now let's move on to prospectivity.